Now, we cannot talk about peanuts without talking about one of the greatest chemists that America has ever known. George Washington Carver lived and worked in the beginning part of the 20th century, in the early 1900s. Now, during this time, the farms of the American South had been producing one single crop for a long time, that's cotton. And as the cotton grew, it depleted the soil terribly. It requires a lot of water, which leaches the nutrients out of the growth area, and it creates these tall plants and this complex cotton, and you needed to grow a lot of it again and again and again. And because the South didn't have the long winters that the North did, the soil never got a chance to rest, and the soil was slowly and gradually being depleted. Now, George Washington Carver was an agricultural chemist, and he knew that they needed to preserve the soil. But he also was a keen student of human nature and a clever businessman. He knew that it had to be profitable for the farmers to grow the peanuts, or they wouldn't do it, because they were barely scraping by and making money at this time as it was. So, what he did was he went to his lab and started making various projects with peanuts. And there's a legend. No one knows if it's 100% true or not. They know that the basics of it did happen, but the other scientists he was working with were skeptical that he could create any viable product out of peanuts. I mean, they knew of that strange paste that you could make out of peanuts and spread on bread and things, but they thought that would never sell. But George Washington Carver waited and invited them all to a Thanksgiving dinner. And if there's anything a scientist loves more than free food, I don't know what it is. So they all went and they enjoyed a fantastic Thanksgiving dinner. I mean, the food tasted a little odd, but they were with friends and it was free food. And at the end of the dinner, George Washington Carver told them smugly that every single item on the table, including the plates they had eaten off of, were made from peanuts. Well, that sold them. But then you had to sell the general public. You had to sell the farmers on it. There was a market for peanuts. And so George Washington Carver started a program where he went around to all the houses in the area promoting this fantastic new product called peanut butter. Now, peanut butter did exist before George Washington Carver, just as the automobile existed before Henry Ford. But both of these men popularized it and made a factory product out of it. And that is how North America has become so dependent on peanut butter. But the thing about peanuts is it began to refresh the soil. And once farmers learned how fantastic it was, they were willing to plant it even without being able to sell the peanuts. Now, one of the personal results of this for me was I love to go and sit around as my grandma tells old stories. She grew up on a small farm in Georgia. She picked cotton. And she told stories of sitting under a wagon, watching her little brothers and sisters as the hot Georgia sun beat down on them. But the stories she loves to tell the most, especially when I bring a big old bag of peanuts in to share with her, is when she and her siblings would go out to the barn and sit in the hay for the horses. Because hay, the straw, the oats, the wheat, grown to feed the animals and create bedding for them, drains the soil almost as bad as cotton. So the farmers plant the peanuts in with the hay because the peanut plants are so short they don't block out the sun. And if you plant peanuts and hay together, that's called companion planting. The hay grows much taller and much better. But when they harvest it, the peanut plants are stuck in with the hay. Now that doesn't matter. The horses and cows will eat peanut plants as well as they will with hay, and they didn't need to take the peanuts out and sell them, so they just left them in. So my grandma and all her siblings would go out to the barn, they'd sit up on the hay, and they'd dig through the hay and find all of these raw peanuts in the hay. And to this day, our family still loves sitting around talking while hulling raw peanuts. And so, that is the legacy of George Washington Carver. Replenishing the soil, he was an environmentalist and a humanitarian. He figured out a way to make the world better, for not only for the people in it, but for the environment around them. Sitting by the roadside on a summer's day, chatting with my messmates, passing time away, lying in the shadows underneath the trees. Goodness, how delicious, eating goober peas. Peas, 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 eating goober peas. Goodness, how delicious, eating goober peas.